And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is David Bennett, who was caught in a violent storm off the California coast and drowned. During his near-death experience, he met beings of light, relived his life, and peeked into his future, all resulting in a complete paradigm shift for him. David, thank you for joining me and welcome.
Jeff, thanks for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you, and if you don't mind, let's start on the day that this storm and NDE happened and go from there.
Yeah, it was back in 1983. I was the chief engineer of a research vessel. We did underwater exploration. It was my dream job. Absolutely loved it. But this day we were, we just finished evaluating an ROV, a remote operated sub, and we were trying to get back to the harbor because a storm was blowing in. And well, we got a couple miles offshore, and the harbor master refused us entry because there were 25 to 30 foot breakers on the seawall. And so we were we're a good size research vessel, 143 foot. And so they were afraid that we'd bottom out trying to get in the harbor. So the harbor master, refused us entry. But we had these design engineers that had designed this sub, and they needed to get to the airport. So we thought, well, instead of the ship coming in, we'll just put a small boat, actually a rubber Zodiac. We put a rubber Zodiac in the water, and we were going to bring him in. But because we weren't doing a full-blown job, we were just doing an evaluation. We didn't have a full complement of deck crew. So the captain asked me to accompany it because I'm third officer and I knew the harbor well. But it was a rough night. So we went down to the bosun's locker, actually got life vests out. And these things were those old World War II life vests, like the big puffy orange, pillows that the life vests used to look like. Well, these things have been down there, I think, since World War II, because we had to beat the dirt off, and we never wore life vests when we were working. We just we're all commercial divers. We've spent our life at sea, under the sea, so we very rarely. But it was really rough this night, so we thought it'd probably be prudent to get some life vests, put them on, and then we jumped in the Zodiac and we started heading in. Well, you can imagine we're 2 miles off the coast. So what we're experiencing 2 miles off the coast isn't anything like what the conditions are at the harbor. So we're looking out for the harbor buoy. And we'd go up on a swell, take a bearing, and because this was at night as well, so all we had were the lights of the coast to kind of guide us. And so we'd try to find the harbor buoy, then we'd run down the trough and up to the top of the next swell and do the same thing over again. Well, it wasn't very long we lost track of the harbor buoy. We didn't realize it at the time, but the storm had actually blown us about a mile south of the harbor. But we could see the shoreline. So we thought, and these Zodiacs, you can land them on the beach. So we figured we'll get them in there one way or another. And there were about 5 of us in this Zodiac because we were also relieving some of the sub crew that were evaluating. So I'm in the bow trying to help navigate. We have one of the deckhands is at the console, driving the Zodiac, and we're heading for the shore. And the next thing you know, we fly off a 25-footer easily. I mean, we actually caught air and slammed down. And I yelled at the mate, turn us about, because we're in a breaker zone. And this is a dangerous place to be. The next thing you know, the next wave was right there. Came down right on top of us, folded the Zodiac in half like a peanut butter sandwich. And I was in the bow. It catapulted me into the sea. Well, I'm trained as a commercial diver. I've logged thousands of hours. So I wasn't too freaked out that here I am in the ocean. And thank goodness we put on our life vest tonight. So I'm hanging on to old Mae West and just, protecting myself, kind of tucked up and just protecting myself, waiting for, the life vest to bring me up to the surface, because this is at nighttime, and I just got tossed into the ocean and tumbled and tossed. I didn't know what was up, what was down, and I had the wherewithal to not try to swim, because I could be swimming down instead of up, because I didn't know which was up, you know. So I'm fairly calm. I'm calm and collected, and I'm just waiting for Mae West to come and bring me to the surface. But you can only hold your breath so long, Jeff. And as a commercial diver, I knew I could hold it for almost 3 minutes, which is a long time. But I've been diving for quite a while, so I knew but I'm holding my breath. It felt like eternity. And eventually, oxygen deprivation starts to kick in, and you start to, you feel lightheaded. All those symptoms start to, and you're like, boy, I can't hold my breath much longer. And you start thinking about things like, is my insurance paid up? Things like that. Is my family going to be taken care of? But then eventually the euphoria takes over, and you breathe in salt water. And the minute I did, I popped out of my body, and I found myself in this absolute darkness. And I was curious because, in commercial training, we go through training to recognize oxygen deprivation and stuff. And this is way beyond anything I'd experienced. But I'm in this absolute darkness that felt as if I really wasn't alone. But I was. But it felt like everything that is ever contained in this world is present at the same time in this absolute nothing. So, but what really caught my attention was there was no longer the roar of the ocean. If you've ever seen a coastal storm like that, you know how loud it is. And this is on the California coast, and water comes out of the north, and this is in March. It's really frigid water. But I'm not cold. I'm comfortable. It's quiet. It's serene. And I'm curious. I'm like, what the heck is happening? And then I saw this light. And it was just like a pinprick of light. But in the vast darkness, it really just caught my attention. And so I started looking at it. And as I was looking at it, it felt like I was moving toward it. It was moving toward me. Not really clear. But as I got closer, the light looked like it was millions and millions of fragments of light, and they were all moving together in unison. And it was almost like a dance. It was beautiful. And the closer I got, I realized that these fragments of light were infinite. They just went on and on and on. And I kept getting closer and closer. And as I got closer, the 3 fragments broke away. And I started feeling this immense waves of just love. It felt like I was being wrapped in a warm embrace of love. And the 3 fragments of light, when they came closer, I recognized them. I recognized them as like family. They felt like family to me, and they were welcoming me home. And this is the hardest part for me to tell, because when I tell it, I feel that welcoming home that they were, communicating to me. And eventually a dozen of them came, and they were all surrounding me and supporting me and loving me. And then it was like there was this knowing that we were going to go into the light, into this specific area that felt like a giant sphere to me. And when we went into this area, we started to relive my life. And we relived it not like watching a movie theater. It was more like reliving the life. Only it was like my consciousness had fragmented into these multiple streams of consciousness, and I was experiencing it through everyone I'd ever interacted with, through their perception, not only just mine. And not only was I experiencing it this way, but these group of light beings that greeted me, I call them my soul family, they were experiencing it the same way as I was. Now, to become the chief engineer of a research vessel in your mid-20s, I was kind of a brash, you could say a brash young man. I grew up from one family to the next, not really in foster care, but it was just the way my mother was a single mom and she would place me with these families. And so I never really had a sense of family. But this group of light beings were more like family than anything I'd ever experienced. And they were supporting me through this. But I got to see, again, I said I was a brash young man. I got to see some of the more unsavory parts of my youth. And I was ashamed that they had to experience this. But they didn't. They just loved me. They supported me. And that really helped. It buoyed me up. It gave me strength to kind of continue through this life review. And so I got to see the good, the bad, the ugly. I got to see it all. And they just loved me and supported me through it. But eventually I came to the point where I had not, it was beyond my life. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was actually peeking into my future. And everything in the near-death experience was absolutely crystal clear. And all of the interactions would cause like these ripples, and everything was crystal clear. I could see how it affected people. I saw how, all those interactions moved people in positive and negative ways, both ways. And, but once I crossed that threshold into my future life, it was like I was looking down a corridor. And this corridor, the central part of the corridor was crystal clear, was very clear. But the periphery was, wasn't so clear. And I got the impression that, if I wanted to, I could go a little bit to the right, to the left, but I'd always be kind of brought back to the center. And so I got to see these certain things in my future that I didn't have any reference to. It was a little disorienting, but my soul family, again, they just supported me. They brought me up. And we got to a certain point where suddenly the light itself, these millions upon millions of fragments of light, kind of like, it was like it all spoke in unison. And it said in this very loving, parental kind of voice, it said, "This is not your time. You must return." And I said, "No way. No way. I am not going back. I found a family that loves me. I feel love like I've never felt before. It's unbelievable. And I know that body is broken. I know that it's just cold and broken. And I had no desire to go back. And so I argued with what I perceived as God. And the light spoke one more time. And this time it said, "You must return. You have a purpose." And that word purpose just like it like resonated through my being. And I understood it. And it was simple and it was efficient. And with that, I came to acceptance. And the moment I accepted that this purpose, I found myself outside my body. The three original light beings that greeted me were with me. They were kind of off to, behind me and off to my sides. And we were watching my body still being tumbled and tossed. We got caught in the breaker zone. And some of the wreckage from the Zodiac was nearby, and the bow line had come and wrapped itself around this arm, and the bitter end of the bow line was tapping my lifeless chest. And I'm staring at this, just wondering, how is the enormity of me going to fit in there? Because when we're outside, when we're beyond this life, there's so much expansiveness to our being, to who we are, that I was just mesmerized by the thought of how am I going to get back into that body? Well, another set of waves hit that wreckage, that Zodiac, and there must have been a little bit of air left in one of the pontoons. And so it popped it up. And when it did, it cinched that rope around my arm and it pulled me up to the surface. When it did, it dislocated the shoulder and the thumb, and it pulled my body up. But I didn't feel it because I was just observing outside my body, and I just rose up with my body and watched it get tangled in the mess of the lines and everything on this, in the wreckage. And more waves came, and they pounded my body up against this, this wreckage. And when it did, it pushed some of that salt water up and out. And when it did, that's when my soul family gave me a general push, and I kind of just vibrated back into my body. Well, I'm on the surface, but I'm having trouble. I can't stay up. I feel like I'm trying to, I just felt like I was slipping below the waves. I couldn't, as hard as I would fight, I couldn't stay up. And a funny thing happens when you come back from one of these experiences. You don't totally disconnect at once. I felt like I was half here and half there still. And so and on the other side, we have this expansive consciousness that we don't have available most of the time in our physical body. And so, but I knew there was something wrong with my life vest. It was a knowing, it was an understanding. And so I unclipped it, and I opened it up, and I looked, and these, like I said before, these were really old, and the fiber lining had dry rotted, and the salt water had super saturated the fiber filling, and the life vest was actually dragging me down. And so I threw that off, and it just immediately disappeared, and I was able to stay up on the surface. My mates that were in this wreck with me, they're the real heroes of this story, because they had stayed on station. One of them had somehow found a flashlight, and so they had all rallied around this one person, and they realized I was missing. And so they were searching for me. They were trying to find me. And eventually, and when you first come back and you're coughing up salt water, I mean, it does havoc to your larynx. So all I could do was squeak and squawk. I really couldn't yell out to them. But eventually they found me, and we all rallied around what was left of the Zodiac, and we then swam that last mile into the beach. So it was a rough night,
to put it mildly. Dave, thank you for sharing your experience. You said that you popped out of your body. Did you actually hear a pop?
No, it was just an instantaneous. I was in my body. I breathed in the salt water. I started to feel the immense burn, and then I was out of my body. So it was instantaneous. It was, so the pain, because I know a lot of people have said, boy, drowning doesn't sound like a fun way to go. I would say it's not that bad. At least it wasn't for me, because you feel the euphoria first, and then there's a small burn, but then, boy, it's like so fast that you don't even realize,
It would seem that it would be a terrible way to go from the panic of not being able to breathe.
Yeah, I guess because of my training, we went through, in commercial dive training, you go through a lot more extensive scenarios where they turn off your air, and you get to experience that feeling, and stuff like that. Because and a lot of guys get washed out of dive training school because, if you show any signs of panic or this, not being comfortable in any situation, you get the red flag and you're gone. It's that simple in commercial dive training. At least it used to be way back when. But I was very comfortable in the water. And like I said, I spent thousands of hours, as a commercial diver. So it didn't bother me. It didn't bother me. I thought for sure that this life vest was going to bring me up to the surface. So I wasn't panicky at all. And I'm one of those types of individuals also that when it hits the fan, I get calm. I start to, I get calm, and I reason my way out of the trouble most of the time. I'd been in trouble before. in some dives. We've had some dives where we, got in a little bit of trouble, but I was able to work my way through it. Didn't have to die those times.
When you were first in the realm that was very, very dark, did it have a velvety texture to it?
That's a good description, because there was a viscousness to it. It was velvety is kind of a good description. I can't think of anything on this earth that would really describe it, but it felt like everything and nothing were all at once in one place. It's very hard to describe, but like I said, I didn't really feel like I was alone, even though I was alone. It felt like I was surrounded and supported all at the same time.
I get the impression from what you're saying that all of those fragments of lights were individual beings, and collectively together we are all God.
That's the conclusions I've come to in that process of integrating it all, that every one of those were a being, but they're all interconnected. And in additional, because I had another experience 11 years later, I was a little more, I don't know, I'm not curious, but I wasn't in such gaga awe over everything. And so I was paying a little more attention. And in the second experience, I relived my near-death experience. I was in a meditation with a spiritual group, and I was called back to the light by the light. The light asked me to return to the light. And in that one, I got to see that, yes, all those lights were individuals. It was their individuality, that part of them that was connected to God, connected to oneness. I know I've talked to a number of people, and we kind of surmise that oneness that everybody feels was represented by those millions upon millions of fragments of light.
Why did the light call you back?
Well, because when I got back, it was a mind blower for me. Okay, I'm an engineer. I saw things in black and white, and suddenly I'd been thrust in this world of multicolor. And so I didn't know how to deal with it. So I did what a good engineer would do, because I started getting these knowings. I would just know things that I didn't go to school with. I didn't experience in my life, but I would know something, really know it. And so I would test it to see how veridical it is. Is this something real? Is this something I can rely on? And so eventually I became comfortable with that. Eventually, and the other part, the part about seeing my soul family, arguing with God, the life review, that was a little too much for me to handle at first. And so I wanted my old life back, because when I came back, I suddenly could see auras. I didn't know what they were at the time. I called them life force energies because I didn't know what an aura was. But it freaked me out. That wasn't part of my normal life. I wanted my old life back because this was really, really disruptive to my way of living. And so I wanted my old life back. So I tried to suppress this experience. I tried to push it away. I like to say, I use the analogy of I put it in a box, wrapped it up with duct tape, because divers love duct tape, and shoved it as far back in my memory as I could, and put it with big old magic marker, said, do not open. I did not. So I tried to get on with my life, but you can't. These experiences they stay with you. They remind you all the time. And so what I decided that I could accept was, in this life review, I saw who I really was. And I came to that I could accept that this is who I am. So acceptance became a big part of my integration, that I could accept that this is who I am. And boy, I've got a lot of work to do on myself, but I can accept this is who I am right here, right now. And I'm going to do better. And then tolerance. Before, I said I was a brash young man when I was raised. I didn't have tolerance for anybody. So I had my way that I was going to do things. If you got in my way, I'd either go through you, around you, or somehow I'd get past you to get to where I wanted to go. I was very driven. And so tolerance was something new. But I saw in this life review how many times people cross our paths and we may not agree with what their choices in life are, but we can be tolerant because they're their choices. They're their life that they're trying to live, their experiences, their interactions in life. And so acceptance of self, tolerance of where I am and others that cross my path. And then the third thing that I could really kind of grasp on was truth. Truth became vital after my near-death experience. And I realized that there's factual truth that as an engineer, that's what I'd always hung on to before. That's what truth was to me. But then after this experience, I realized there's also a personal truth, a truth that resonates within our being, within our heart. And every time we cross one of these truths, they become bigger than life. They resonate within our heart. And so this acceptance, tolerance, and truth kind of became my mantra. And so I used that to move forward, but I tried to shove the rest of the experience away. And then I started searching for this love, because the love became, it was such a driving force in the experience that I wanted to try to understand it. And so I studied everything I could get my hands on that talked about love, unconditional love, divine love. And so that's what carried me into this second experience when I was called to return, because I had repressed the bigger part of the experience. And I've talked to some researchers, NDE researchers, and they've told me that it's not uncommon for experiencers, if they repress their experience, that it's going to come bubbling up. And the example that they were talking about, especially childhood experiencers, a lot of times they'll have the experience, and to them, they accept it readily because, they're not that far removed from when they first, entered into this life. And so it's familiar to them. But the adult community around them tell them, oh, no, darling, that was a dream, or that isn't real. And so they're taught to repress it. But then later on in life, it all comes bubbling back up. Well, that's what happened to me in this meditation. 11 years later, I had repressed the greater part of it. And so it came bubbling back up. Only this time I got to see 11 more years in my life review of how much I had grown from that experience, even though I didn't know, even though I didn't think I'd changed that much. But in that 11 years, because I'd used acceptance, tolerance, and truth, and had these intuitive knowings that I began to rely on, that it really did affect a big change in me.
What is your purpose?
That's a great question. I believe, especially when I look back at the life review, I believe that we have just many, many, many purposes in life. A lot of times we'll be doing something, or we'll read something, or we'll come across some information that is novel to us, new to us, and we'll maybe learn it, integrate it, and then someone else comes along that needs that information, and we're right there for them. We can help them out, right? That's a small purpose. But then there's also grand purposes. There's purposes that bring humanity together, like all of us learning to connect with the divine within us. That's a purpose we all share, So there's multiple types of purpose in life. And so the neat thing is when we come here, we feel like we're these separate individuals, and that we're forging our life as a separate individual. We don't recognize we've lost the connection to that interconnectedness, to the divine within us that is connected to everything and everyone. And so that separateness kind of makes us blind in a lot, blind to a lot of things. And so we get caught up in our circumstances until we learn to still ourselves, calm ourselves, and rise above the circumstances with clearer vision. Then we can connect with our divine source. And that's one of the best purposes, I think, that humanity faces, is to try to connect and reconnect to our interconnectedness.
One thing I find fascinating about your experience is that the other beings also relived your life. And is it possible that they wanted to relive some more, so you weren't done yet and you needed to come back?
I mean, I have ruminated about this for quite a few years now. But yeah, I really do believe that there was some key things in there. One was my acceptance of additional purpose. Okay, that I had more work to do. You could phrase it 100 different ways, but there was a reason for me to come back, and that I accepted that. And the minute I came to acceptance, that I found myself back. But the soul family and them experiencing it with me, it's interesting. I believe that we have probably shared many lives together. And I've learned in the second experience that one of the soul family that were there was someone that I did know. In fact, he was my guardian in this life. And so, but he passed in those 11 years. And then I got to recognize him more in the second experience. And so I believe that we're kind of a family that kind of work through lifetimes together. Before this, I didn't really believe in reincarnation or anything like that. But as I've tried to work my way through this experience, I've come to realize that my soul family and I have, lived many lifetimes together.
It sounds to me that you weren't too happy with some of the behaviors and the way you live this life. Do you think part of that purpose was you needed to come back and do a better job?
Yeah, I believe that. And I also believe that I needed, I like to say that, this near-death experience was kind of like a correction, a whack on the head to get me back on track, because I think I might have wandered a little off afield with my ego. I was really proud of being the chief engineer of that research vessel. And I think it was getting in the way a little bit. And so I really think that, and also I believe that probably I had arranged before I came into this life to have an NDE to self-correct and to put me back on a spiritual path.
You arranged to have it anyways, or only if you got off track?
Maybe, I don't know, Jeff. That's an excellent question. I mean, we could kick that can around quite a while, but yeah, I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure that, but those are scenarios that could all fit that narrative.
And do you ever think about that? Probably all of us have a purpose for coming here, but the problem is when you come, you don't remember it.
Yeah. But I really believe, remember when I was, when I talked about looking down my future, that there was a core path. I believe that we have, that our purpose is that path. Okay. But on the periphery, we have options that we can, and this is our free will, I believe, that we can go off this way and we can meander off the path a little bit. But I really believe that we'll get drawn back or nudged back. If we go a little to the right, we'll get pulled back a little till we're, back on the path. And then if we go the other way, then we'll get nudged back onto the path. I believe that our free will allows us to wander down our path. So, and I'm a firm believer of wandering down the path and get as much experiences and be so involved in your life that you have a lot of experiences to draw upon.
Did you see anything during your experience in the future that afterwards came to pass?
Yeah, there's a couple big ones. One, I saw I was going to have cancer. And in 2000, I had quit my life at sea. I had become assistant manager of dialysis programs at St. Joe's Hospital in Syracuse, New York. And I knew I knew, and I remembered from that life preview, I guess you could call it, that I was going to have cancer, but I didn't have a timeline for it because time doesn't exist on the other side. So I thought it was going to happen sometime later in life. But in 2000, I suddenly, it felt like my back exploded. And I went up to the emergency department and presented myself. And they thought that I was possibly having a heart attack. But after a bunch of tests, they found out that I had stage 4 lung cancer that had metastasized into my spine. It ate away 2.5 bones of my thoracic, and the tumor could no longer support my spine. And so my spine had collapsed. It was stage 4 lung cancer, lung and bone cancer. With extensive tests, they found I had lesions in my hip, my brain, my kidneys. And they told me I only had, it was moving very rapidly. And after biopsies and everything, they determined that I probably should get my affairs in order, and that I probably only had, 8 weeks to live. And so 2 months. They figured I had about 2 months. But I had saw in my life review that I was going to have cancer. I didn't know how severe it was going to be, or at least I didn't recall how severe it was going to be. But I also saw I was going to live beyond it. So they were going to give me, in fact, they gave me a pint of morphine and a jar of Percocet and told me to get my affairs in order and try to stay as comfortable as possible. And they were going to let me just expire. And I said, no, we're going to treat it. And so I was in a very fortunate position. Again, more synchronicity in life, but I was in a very fortunate position to be, an assistant director in this hospital. And so I was able to pick my care team. And, excuse me. And so we treated it. But I also used this guidance, the spirit guidance that I had developed over the years with my soul family to integrate some additional holistic approaches. And I think the combination of traditional and holistic worked for me because within 6 months I was cancer-free.
It's amazing. I wonder what those doctors' reactions were.
Yeah, they had some great reactions. They were like, I don't know what you're doing, but whatever you're doing, just keep doing it. And they never used the word remission because at that 6 month point where I finally convinced them that I felt I was doing really well, and they finally did another PET scan where they saw there were no active cells in my body, that but I still had a collapsed spine. And I had to live with that collapsed spine for over a year because they felt that the cancer was going to come back. And it was just their reality, but it wasn't my reality. It wasn't because I was using not only some holistic approaches, but I was also I knew I was going to live beyond the cancer. So I was visualizing my life beyond the cancer. And so their reality wasn't my reality. And so I really believe that a positive outlook has a huge effect on our body's ability to heal and to overcome some of these obstacles.
Do you still see auras?
I really, at first, it really bothered me. And not only auras, but I could look into someone's eyes and I could see their light. And that felt so intrusive to me. It felt like, I shouldn't be able to see your light without your permission, so it was kind of like this, whereas before the experience, I was the guy that was always like in your face, eyeball to eyeball. But afterwards, I had to kind of learn to shut it off. I had to learn because it was very uncomfortable for me, and seeing auras. And this is in Southern California. Palm trees are amazing. I have to say, Jeff, they are absolutely amazing. The auras in some of the nature was amazing. So, but I learned to, I kind of, because I wanted my old life back, I learned to shut it down. When I focus now, yes, I can see auras, but I have to, focus on it. But I can still do it, but I have to focus on it.
Can you give us a sense of how big you really were outside of your body?
On the other side, you don't have the constraints that we have here in this physical life, So perception is kind of hard, because I could think of, or I could foresee myself as a light being, and I was a light being. I could foresee myself next to the wreckage of the boat, and I was next to the boat. So who I was infinite in a lot of different ways. I could be anywhere or anything, because we're so interconnected with everything that we can just traverse, the cosmos, basically. So yeah, that's kind of a hard question to answer in reality, because this expansiveness expands and contracts as we desire. Since I've come back, and I was very fortunate to connect with some other near-death experiencers who helped and became kind of mentors for me. And one taught me that we can return to the light. And so when I was going through my cancer, one of the things that I used was I used what this experiencer kind of taught me, that yes, we can go back into the light, and we can experience that love that we wanted to experience. But I also used that go into the light to connect with my divine nature to help me to overcome the cancer. And so I developed kind of my own white light energy kind of technique to help me to overcome the cancer and everything. And I do that now for other people. It's part of what I believe my purpose is now, is to help other people by doing that, for them. But when I go into the light now and I connect with, say, your light essence feels incredibly large to me. And the light itself is infinite, but we can tap into, whatever elements we need from it. But we have to first make that connection to our divine nature, to our light, to our fragment, in order to be able to work with the light.
It seems like you're able to just do it instantaneously.
I can now. It used to require a little ceremony to quiet my mind down, but now I'm very comfortable with it. So yes, I can kind of go into the light and make that connection. In fact, just speaking with people like we're speaking right now, I can feel your essence. I'm not in the light right now, but I can sense your essence as we're speaking.
When you teach people to do it, have to have them meditate or something first?
I've tried to teach 3 people. My present wife, and we went through quite a long process of quieting our minds. And when I got her to the threshold of the light, the minute that she felt that light, that love, that expansiveness, she shut down. And because it just was like, it was when we die and go on the other side, our emotional body stays here. So we don't have that overwhelming feeling of, of the light, of the love, because that emotional part of us, turns us into a puddle of tears pretty much by feeling that love. So the first time I taught it to someone, it was, it was a, she had a really tough time. She felt it, and then, she shut down. The second person couldn't get out of her head. She was a very analytical thinker type, and she couldn't quiet the mind enough to be able to reach the threshold. The last person that I just, not that long ago, just about a month ago, that had convinced me, had over the years had wanted to, she's an experiencer. So being an experiencer kind of helps, because you've already been to the doorway, you've been to the threshold. It's a matter of quieting yourself to the point that you can recognize the threshold and where you experience it. And one thing I like to point out to people is, first, think of what inspires you. Where does where does inspiration come from? It comes from our divine nature. That's where inspiration comes from. And when we feel inspired, usually somewhere in our physical body, there's a reaction. There's a sense, there's a feeling. Myself, I feel it in my heart. It feels like my heart is opening. It's almost like a rose petal unfolding. That's the way it feels to me. I have friends who feel it in the palms of their hands, in their crown, in their third eye. But where do you feel when you have an inspiring moment? Where do you feel it? And inspiration can come in so many different ways. It can come a song, dance, movement, meditation. Accountant might feel it in the numbers, things like that. Where does inspiration come from for you? That's a way to explore it, I believe. And because that is our divine nature talking to us,
Do you fear death at all?
No. When my time comes, in fact, when the cancer came, the cancer diagnosis, I was thinking, this could be my ticket home. I could go home. But then, because I'd had that prevision, I knew there was a purpose behind it. And so I was like, no, I have to stick this out. But when my time comes, I'll be very, I won't say pleased, but I will not fear crossing and going back into the light and staying there. I know a number of experiencers, myself included, who kind of have a longing for, but we understand the purpose in life, and the experiences that we have in life are a blessing. And so we wouldn't do anything to shorten this life. We wouldn't do anything to go on the other side. But when our time has come, I'll welcome it.
If you had a friend that was grieving over the loss of a loved one, what kind of advice would you give?
Well, that's hard, because we're human. We're human. In fact, recently, we've had some people pass, and our human heart still grieves. And I would tell them, don't be afraid to grieve. Don't be afraid to grieve. It's a natural process, because we still feel we were very close to them. We felt their presence. They were a part of our life. And it's like you've woven a tapestry with them, and they've left. But the threads of that tapestry are still present with you. So they're living on with you. But they're also living on with you, because on the other side, they're still present. They can still be with you, and they can still help you and guide you. So they have passed on, but they're living in just a different dimension than what we are. So they really haven't gone anywhere.
It looks like you have Buddhist statues and pictures
Oh.
behind you. Are you a Buddhist?
If you looked at my library, you would think, wow, he's got every religion known to man in his library. I really resonate toward Buddhism and Native American spirituality because my second experience happened. I for a short time I lived some of my teen years and some of my adult years in Arizona, and I was very fortunate during my teen years when I was going through a lot of that dysfunctional family stuff that some of my friends, most of my friends, were Native Americans, and they their grandmothers kind of took me aside and kind of showed me how to go into my sacred space. And so Native wisdom and Buddhism have a lot of similarities. And so I kind of practice a melding of those different beliefs. Because if you could see over here, there's my smudge feathers over there, and you can't see it, but there's a pipe on the other side of that altar. So I I look for the spirituality in just about all different types of faiths and philosophies. But I was honored to meet His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and then I had an experience with Padre Pio. So the two figures that you see on that altar back there are His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I got to spend 3 days learning the way of the Bodhisattva in a class with His Holiness and 100 American students, and so yeah, that really resonated with me.
Did you mention your NDE to him?
No, we didn't have one-on-ones. We were just in a small class, and he was teaching us the ways of the Bodhisattva. He would bless us, and actually he offered us to take our vows, the Bodhisattva vows with him.
What is the Bodhisattva?
A Bodhisattva is someone who has agreed to continue to incarnate in this life until all sentient beings have evolved.
Are you in agreement with that personally?
When I said I didn't, I sat in the class because I just wanted to be in his presence for 3 days. But by the end of it, I felt pulled to take my vows with His Holiness. And while we were saying our vows, it was very familiar. I believe that this isn't the only lifetime that I've made that agreement.
Well, after watching this podcast, people may want to reach out to you and ask you questions. Are you open to that? And if so,
oh yes,
how can they
definitely
contact you?
Well, in your comment sections, I'll be happy to be present in your comment sections of this podcast. Also, they can go to my website, which is Dharma, Dharma. I can't even spell Dharma. Dharma, Dharma, Dharma Talks, TALKS.com, dharmatalks.com. And there you can find links to my Facebook, my Instagram, my YouTube. And my YouTube channel is Dave's Dharma Talk. And there I have a podcast where I do a weekly podcast, unlike you doing a daily. I have to applaud the conviction that you put into a daily podcast. But mine's a weekly that it talks about contemplative living. In other words, using that stillness and taking time in our lives to go into stillness and to contemplate some of the things we need in order to grow spiritually.
All right. Do you have anything else that you're working on that you want us to know about?
That's kind of it right now. There may be another book in the future, but the book that talks about my near-death experience and the integration afterwards, the path of integration, is Voyage of Purpose. That's available through Amazon, most of your book dealers.
Well, before we finish up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
Yeah, I think something that I've learned that it really, really helps me, because, we get pulled away. We get pulled all the time. The world has so much going on that we're constantly being pulled this way and that way with the circumstances that are going on around us and internationally and globally. And so we tend to lose track of our divine nature. And I like to call our divine nature spirit. Okay. I just call it spirit. And we don't really have to go looking for spirit, because spirit is within us all the time. We just have to learn to quiet ourselves in order to make that connection.
David, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
Jeff, thanks for having me. Again, I'm thrilled to be here and having this conversation with you.
Thank you. The pleasure was all mine. Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.